My name is Nora Caldwell, and a year after my husband passed, I found myself seated at a long oak table, the air heavy with candle smoke and grief that never quite faded. The family had gathered to honor his memory, but in truth, it felt more like a performance, polished silverware clinking against porcelain plates while everyone avoided eye contact with me. I kept my hands folded in my lap, steadying myself, when my oldest son, Derek, rose to make a toast. He lifted his glass high, his smile sharp as broken glass. "To my mother," he said, pausing just long enough for the room to fall silent. "The poor widow, doing the best she can." Laughter rippled around the table, soft but cutting, and I felt the words slice through me like a blade. I did not speak. I did not flinch. Instead, I let the wine settle on my tongue like ash and watched their faces, my own children, their spouses, all of them comfortable in their belief that I was powerless, that I was less. Inside, a storm tightened its grip around my chest, but I held my breath and forced a faint smile. What Derek didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my husband had left me with more than memories. He had left me with a plan and the means to carry it out. The night after that dinner, when the echo of Derek's toast still burned in my ears, I pulled the old leather-bound ledger from the bottom drawer of my desk. The pages smelled faintly of dust and tobacco, the scent of my husband clinging to every line he had written. His handwriting was neat, deliberate, the kind of script that belonged to a man who believed numbers could never lie. I traced the ink with my fingertip as though touching him again, and slowly the story of our finances unfolded. Every entry carried more weight than the last. He hadn't only provided for me, he had prepared for me. There were notes on properties, quiet transfers of shares, details about a company name I had seen before but never understood, Caldwell Estates, LLC. The phone rang just as I found the page marked with a folded corner. I answered and heard the calm, precise voice of Mr. Lawson, my husband's longtime attorney. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said. "I trust you've had a chance to look through the documents?" "Yes," I whispered, though my throat tightened around the word. "Then you understand," he continued, "that your husband placed you in control. The LLC holds significant stakes in each of your children's homes. He knew they weren't as careful as he was. He wanted you to have the power to protect yourself." The words should have comforted me, but they pressed down like an anvil. My children's laughter from the night before rang again in my head. Mocking, careless, protect myself. Was that what this was, or was it a test to see if I would use the power he left behind? I closed the ledger, holding it against my chest. My reflection in the darkened window startled me. Eyes rimmed red, jaw set harder than I had ever seen. The woman who stared back was not the fragile widow they thought she was. When I finally placed the book back on the desk, I knew the decision was already made. They had called me poor. They had called me weak. Soon enough, they would learn how wrong they were. In the days that followed, I forced myself to look at my children with clearer eyes, as if the ledger had stripped away the veil I'd kept over them. Derek, my firstborn, had always carried himself like he was destined to inherit his father's steadiness. Yet the truth was laid bare in credit slips and refinance notices. He had pulled money out of his house 3 times in 5 years, betting on quick gains from the market and losing each time. His wife, Monica, never seemed to notice, or maybe she didn't care. She flaunted their vacations, the designer handbags, the leased cars they could barely afford. I remembered the way she looked across the table at me that night, half smile curling as Derek raised his glass. To her, I wasn't a mother-in-law. I was an inconvenience. Emily, my youngest, was different. or at least I wanted to believe she was. She had a softness to her, a kindness her father adored, but even she had stumbled. Her husband had convinced her to invest in some tech startup that collapsed within months. The debt hung over them like a shadow, though she tried to pretend everything was fine. One Sunday, I invited Emily for coffee. She sat at my kitchen table, fidgeting with her spoon. "Mom," she said, "Derek thinks you should consider moving in with us. It'd be easier on you." The words tasted bitter before I even answered. Easier on me, or easier on them. They wanted the image of control, the assurance that I would stay where they could watch, silent and small. "I appreciate the thought," I told her, keeping my voice steady, "but I'm managing just fine." She looked down, guilt flashing across her face, and I realized she wasn't cruel like her brother. She was simply afraid of losing the stability she thought only Derek could provide. That night, as I washed the coffee cups, I saw the ledger again in my mind, the pages waiting for me to turn them into action. My children believed I was cornered, trapped by age and circumstance. But I wasn't trapped. The cracks in their walls were showing. All I had to do was decide whether to step through them. The county courthouse was colder than I remembered, its marble floors echoing with the shuffle of boots and the low murmur of strangers waiting for their chance at fortune. I had never stepped foot into a tax auction before, but here I was, clutching a folder Mr. Lawson had prepared for me. Inside were the documents that confirmed my position, quiet stakes in Derek's property, liens that gave me the right to act where he had failed. I sat in the back row, watching as names were called and properties ticked across the screen like numbers on a lottery board. Men in worn baseball caps lifted their hands. Investors in tailored suits scribbled on clipboards. My heart thudded so hard I thought the sound might betray me. When the clerk announced the next parcel, my stomach turned. It was Derek's address. The home where he and Monica posed for Christmas cards, where they had once invited me for Thanksgiving but left me seated alone at the end of the table. Now it was up for bid, the unpaid taxes leaving it vulnerable. "Opening at 20,000, the clerk called. Hands shot up. The numbers climbed. I could feel my palms dampen against the folder. Then, when the room settled at a pause, I raised my hand. My voice didn't tremble when I gave my bid. For a moment, the room blurred. I could hear my own breath. The judge's gavel. The confirmation that Caldwell Estates LLC, my LLC now, had secured the property. Just like that, my son's fortress belonged to me. Walking out into the winter air. The cold stung my cheeks, but inside I burned. It wasn't triumph I felt. Not exactly. It was something heavier, sharper. I thought of Derek's smug smile, of Monica's dismissive eyes, and I knew this was only the beginning. That night, I set the folder on my kitchen table and stared at the deed. I had crossed a line I could never uncross. The widow they mocked was gone. In her place stood a woman who carried her husband's foresight like a torch. I poured myself a glass of wine, holding it steady in my hand. Soon, they would learn who truly held the keys to their lives. 3 weeks later, I stood in the hallway outside Derek's front door with an envelope pressed tight in my hand. The paper felt heavier than it should have, carrying the words that would shift the balance of our family forever. Mr. Lawson had drafted them with precision, a 30-day notice to quit, issued under Ohio law, requiring Derek and Monica to either begin paying rent or leave. When the door opened, Monica's perfume hit me first, sharp and artificial. She crossed her arms, eyes narrowing at the sight of the envelope. "What is this?" "Official notice," I said evenly. "From this point forward, your tenancy falls under my authority. You'll have 30 days to comply." Her laugh was brittle, cruel. You're out of your mind. This is our home." Derek appeared behind her, his face flushed with anger. He snatched the paper from my hand and scanned it, the color draining from his cheeks as he read. "You can't be serious. You'd do this to your own son?" The question pierced deeper than he knew, but I refused to waver. "I'm enforcing the agreements your father put in place. I won't be mocked in my own family and left powerless in the process." His voice rose, echoing through the foyer. "You're betraying us." "No," I said softly, though every muscle in my body trembled. "I'm protecting myself, the way he intended me to." Monica muttered something about lawyers, her heels clacking as she stormed into the living room. Derek stood frozen, still gripping the notice, his knuckles white. I turned to leave, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. Each step back to my car felt like walking through water. I had handed my son an eviction notice. Nothing about it felt like victory. But as I slid into the driver's seat and shut the door, I drew a long breath. The line had been drawn. Derek would either fight me in court or face the reality that I now owned the walls around him. I started the engine, the growl of it steady beneath me, and knew the next battle would not take place in his doorway. It would be in a courtroom, under the eyes of strangers who would decide which of us was telling the truth. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and dust, a place where stories of broken promises and betrayals were etched into the walls. I sat at the defendant's table, my hands folded neatly in front of me, as Derek and Monica swept into the room with their attorney. Derek wouldn't look at me, his jaw tight, his suit too crisp, as though polished armor could hide the desperation beneath. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, called the case Caldwell versus Caldwell, she said, and the words echoed like thunder in my chest. Monica leaned close to her lawyer, whispering, while Derek stared straight ahead. Their claim was simple, that I had manipulated my husband, influenced him unfairly in his final years to seize control of assets that should have belonged to his children. It was an accusation that felt like a knife to the heart. My marriage had been built on trust and respect, and to hear it twisted into something poisonous made me want to shout. But I stayed silent. Mr. Lawson stood, his voice calm and deliberate. "Your Honor, the documents speak for themselves. Mr. Caldwell established Caldwell Estates, LLC, over a decade ago. He transferred ownership gradually, with full knowledge and intent. There was no coercion, no fraud. My client, Mrs. Caldwell, only executed what her husband had already set in motion." He handed over the ledger, copies of deeds, tax receipts, all the proof of foresight, of planning. I watched the judge leaf through them, her brow furrowing, and felt my heartbeat settle into a slow, steady rhythm. When it was Derek's turn, his voice cracked under the weight of his anger. "She's my mother," he said, pointing toward me, "and she's trying to throw me out of my own home. My father would never have wanted this." I wanted to cry, to tell him that his father had loved him but had also seen his recklessness, his blind spending. Instead, I forced myself to breathe, to remember the way my husband used to squeeze my hand when words failed us. The judge finally set the papers aside. "I see no evidence of undue influence," she said firmly. "The transfers are valid. The LLC stands. This court dismisses the case." The gavel struck, final and sharp. Derek's shoulders sagged, Monica's face twisted with disbelief, and I remained seated, still as stone. Inside, though, a wave surged through me. Relief, grief, and something dangerously close to triumph. As I walked out of the courtroom, I caught Derek's eyes for a fleeting moment. There was no recognition there, no warmth, only the look of a man who realized the ground beneath him had shifted forever. I stepped into the crisp afternoon air, the sun blazing against the courthouse steps, and thought the battle at law was over. But the war at the dinner table had only just begun. A month after the court's ruling, Emily insisted we all gather for dinner again. She said it was time to try, at least, to be a family. I agreed, though the thought of sitting across from Derek and Monica again made my stomach knot. The house smelled of roast beef and garlic bread, comfort foods meant to smooth sharp edges. The table was set as though nothing had changed, but everything had. Derek sat rigid, his fork clinking too loudly against his plate. Monica barely spoke, her eyes darting anywhere but toward me. I passed the salad bowl across the table, and Derek's hand brushed mine. The contact was accidental, but the way he pulled back as though burned said everything. To him, I was no longer his mother. I was his landlord. Emily tried to fill the silence. She asked about work, about the weather, even about the neighbor's new dog. Her voice wavered, thin as glass, but she kept going, desperate to patch a hole that couldn't be sewn shut in one evening. Finally, she looked at me with a kind of quiet bravery. "Mom," she said, her voice soft but steady, "I know it's been hard, but I want you to know I'm proud of you." The room froze. Derek's jaw tightened. Monica's fork scraped against her plate, and my eyes blurred before I could stop them. I lowered my gaze, blinking away the sting, unwilling to let them see me cry. I wanted to tell Emily how much that meant, how her father would have been proud too, but the words stuck. Instead, I simply reached across and squeezed her hand. For a moment, just a moment, I felt less alone. The rest of the meal passed in uneasy quiet. Plates were cleared, dessert offered and declined, and soon the evening ended with polite goodbyes that felt more like treaties signed under duress. When I stepped out into the cool night, I breathed deep, letting the air fill the hollow spaces the dinner had left. We had sat together again, but nothing had healed. If anything, the fractures were clearer now, lines running through the very foundation of our family. I knew then that the next decision I faced would test me even more. It wasn't just about holding on to power. It was about deciding what to let go of. The cabin by the lake had always been my husband's sanctuary. He built it with his own hands, board by board, long before Derek and Emily were born. Every summer we'd drive up there, the kids chasing fireflies while he grilled on the old stone pit. Even after he grew sick, he'd sit on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the water shift with the wind. So when the offer came, a real estate investor eager to pay cash, no contingencies, I felt the weight of it settle on my chest. Selling the cabin felt like selling a piece of him, a piece of us. I drove up one last time before deciding. The dirt road was rutted from spring rains, the air sweet with pine. The cabin stood the same as it always had, its shutters faded, the deck in need of paint. Inside, dust coated the furniture, but the echoes of laughter clung to the walls. I ran my hand along the mantel where Derek had carved his initials at 12, where Emily once taped her drawings of the lake. I sat on the porch with a thermos of coffee, staring out at the water. My reflection shimmered on the surface, older, sharper than the woman who used to sit there beside her husband. I whispered his name, and for a moment it felt like he answered in the rustle of leaves. "Am I betraying you if I let it go?" I asked aloud, my voice breaking against the silence. "Or am I honoring you by moving forward?" The breeze shifted, cool against my cheek, and I realized the truth. He had never built this cabin for himself alone. He built it for us, for a family that no longer existed in the same way. Holding on to the building wouldn't bring back the love or the laughter, but letting it go could give me the means to build something new. By the time I locked the door, my decision was made. I would sell. I would take the money and turn it into something that carried his spirit forward, not backward. Driving away. I glanced in the rearview mirror at the cabin shrinking into the trees. It hurt, but it also freed me. The past had been beautiful, but the future, my future, was waiting to be written. The sale closed quickly, the kind of deal investors dream about. A wire transfer landed in my account, more money than I had ever seen in one place. For a moment, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the balance, the screen glowing against the dim light of the room. It felt unreal, as though my husband's careful planning had finally bloomed into something undeniable. Not long after, Derek and Monica came by to sign their lease agreements. Their lawyer had advised them to comply, at least for now. Derek's face was tight, his pen scratching across the page with reluctant strokes. He couldn't look at me. Monica muttered something under her breath, too low to catch, but her eyes burned with resentment. When they left, silence filled the house, but it wasn't empty silence anymore. It was power. And it belonged to me. They had called me poor. They had called me weak. Now they paid me rent to live under roofs secured by my husband's foresight and my resolve. Yet revenge alone was never the point. I kept hearing Emily's words at dinner. "I'm proud of you," and I knew pride had to be worth more than victory. So I met with Mr. Lawson again, this time not to talk about deeds or notices, but about a new foundation, Caldwell Community Center, a place where widows, single mothers, and women like me could learn how to manage money, secure their futures, and never be left defenseless. The first time I unlocked the doors of the building we purchased for it, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The walls were bare, the rooms empty, but I could already imagine them filled, with women at tables, notebooks open, learning how to balance, invest, and stand on their own. At the opening ceremony, I spoke softly, my voice carrying more weight than I thought possible. "A year ago," I said, "I was called a poor widow at my own husband's memorial dinner. Today, I stand here not as poor, not as powerless, but as a woman who chose to take back her life. And I want every woman who walks through these doors to know they can do the same." The applause was gentle but steady, and as I looked out at the faces before me, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.